The letter was pinned to the barn door with a rusty nail, the paper trembling in the October wind like a white flag of surrender. And when Clayton Matthews pulled it free, he had no idea his entire life was about to change. The handwriting was delicate but hurried, the ink smudged in places as though tears had fallen while the words were being written. Clayton stood in the doorway of his barn just outside Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, squinting at the page in the fading light of 1882. His cattle lowed softly in the corral behind him, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the darkening sky. "Sir," the letter began, "I do not know who you are, but I am desperate. My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 23 years old and I have nowhere else to turn. My father died 3 months ago in Denver from pneumonia, and the bank has taken everything we owned. I came west on the train with the last of my money, hoping to find work, but Cheyenne has no place for a woman alone. I stayed in your barn last night because the cold was too much to bear. I ate some of the bread I found wrapped in cloth near the horse stalls, and I am sorry for taking without asking. I am leaving now because I do not want to cause you trouble, but I am heading north toward the old mining camps. If you are a God-fearing man with any kindness in your heart, please do not think ill of me. I had no choice. Respectfully, Sarah Calloway." Clayton read the letter 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each pass. A woman alone, heading toward the mining camps in October with winter breathing down the mountains. Those camps were filled with desperate men who had lost everything chasing gold and silver, men who would see a woman like her as something to take rather than protect. He crumpled the letter in his fist and then smoothed it out again, looking at the date scrawled at the top. Today. She had written this today. He turned on his heel and strode toward the house, his boots kicking up dust. The sun was sinking fast, painting the prairie in shades of orange and purple, and he knew he had maybe an hour of decent light left. His ranch foreman, an older man named Jack Sutton, was sitting on the porch whittling a piece of wood when Clayton burst through the gate. "Jack, saddle Thunder for me, now." Jack looked up, his weathered face creasing with concern. "What is it, boss?" "There is a woman in trouble. She stayed in the barn last night and now she is heading toward the mining camps on foot. I have to find her before dark." Jack was on his feet immediately, the whittling forgotten. "Those camps are no place for a lady. I will come with you." "No, stay here and mind the cattle. I will be back as soon as I can." Clayton did not wait for an argument. He went into the house and grabbed his rifle, a canteen of water, a wool blanket, and a saddlebag with dried meat and hardtack. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind was racing. Why had she come to his barn? Was it random, or had someone told her about him? It did not matter. What mattered was finding her before something terrible happened. Thunder was ready when Clayton came back outside, the big roan stallion pawing at the ground as though he sensed the urgency. Clayton swung into the saddle and dug his heels in, sending Thunder charging down the dirt road that led north from his property. The wind bit at his face, carrying the smell of sage and dry grass, and he leaned low over the horse's neck, urging him faster. The mining camps were about 15 miles away, scattered across the foothills of the mountains like forgotten scars. If Sarah was on foot, she might have covered 5 or 6 miles by now, maybe less if she was tired and hungry. Clayton scanned the horizon as he rode, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. The prairie stretched out endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwood trees and the distant silhouette of the mountains. He found her just as the sun touched the edge of the world. She was a small figure against the vastness of the landscape, walking with her head down and her arms wrapped around herself. She wore a dark blue dress that was torn at the hem, and her hair, the color of honey, hung loose around her shoulders. Clayton slowed Thunder to a walk as he approached, not wanting to startle her. When she heard the hoofbeats, she turned, and the fear in her eyes made his chest tighten. "Miss Calloway," he called out, keeping his voice gentle. She froze, her body tensed like a rabbit ready to run. "How do you know my name?" Clayton dismounted and pulled the letter from his pocket, holding it up so she could see. "You left this on my barn door. I came to find you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she just stared at him, as though she could not believe what she was hearing. Then her face crumpled and she pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Clayton closed the distance between them in a few long strides, and without thinking, he put a hand on her shoulder. "You are safe now," he said quietly. "I am not going to hurt you." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and he saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She was beautiful, even in her desperation, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of the sky before a storm. But it was the sadness in those eyes that struck him the hardest, a sadness that spoke of loss and loneliness in a world that had turned its back on her. "I did not think anyone would come," she whispered. "I am here now," Clayton said, "and I am taking you back to my ranch. You can rest there, eat something, and we will figure out what to do next." She shook her head, pulling away from him. "I cannot impose on you like that. I have already caused enough trouble." "You have not caused any trouble, and you are not going to survive out here alone. Please, let me help you." She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the darkening horizon and then back to him. Finally, she nodded, and Clayton felt something loosen in his chest. He helped her onto Thunder, settling her in front of him in the saddle, and then wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. She was shivering, her body thin and frail beneath the fabric, and he made a silent vow to do everything in his power to protect her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Thunder's hooves and the whisper of the wind through the grass. Sarah leaned back against Clayton's chest, and he could feel the tension slowly draining out of her as the warmth of the blanket and the security of his presence began to sink in. He kept one arm around her waist, holding her steady, and with the other he guided Thunder through the gathering dusk. By the time they reached the ranch, the stars were out in full force, a glittering canopy that stretched from horizon to horizon. Jack was waiting on the porch, and his eyes widened when he saw Sarah. He did not ask any questions, just hurried to help her down from the horse while Clayton dismounted. "Get her inside and warm," Clayton said. "I will take care of Thunder." Jack nodded and led Sarah into the house, his voice low and soothing as he spoke to her. Clayton watched them go, then turned his attention to his horse, stripping off the saddle and rubbing him down with handfuls of straw. His mind was already racing ahead, thinking about what Sarah would need, how long she could stay, what he could do to help her find her footing again. When he finally went inside, he found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of hot tea in her hands. Jack had lit the stove and laid out some bread and cheese, and the warmth of the room was a stark contrast to the cold prairie outside. Sarah looked up when Clayton entered, and he saw a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know how to repay you for your kindness." Clayton pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "You do not owe me anything. I did what anyone should do." "Not everyone would have come looking for me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most people would have thrown the letter away and forgotten about it. I am not most people." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as though trying to understand what kind of man he was. Clayton let her look, his own eyes taking in the details of her face, the way the firelight caught in her hair, the delicate curve of her jaw. She was younger than him by a few years, he guessed, but there was an old weariness in her eyes that spoke of hardships he could only imagine. My father was a shopkeeper in Denver, she said suddenly, as though the words had been building inside her and finally needed to come out. We had a good life, not wealthy but comfortable. Then he got sick and the doctor bills ate through our savings. When he died, I found out he had taken out loans to keep the shop running, loans I could not pay. The bank took everything. The shop, the house, even the furniture. I had nothing left but the clothes on my back and a train ticket west. Why did you come to Cheyenne? I heard there were opportunities here, jobs for women in the hotels and restaurants. But when I arrived, I found out that those jobs were already taken, and the men here do not look kindly on a woman traveling alone. I spent my last coins on a night in a boarding house, and then I had nowhere to go. I was walking through the countryside, trying to find somewhere to sleep when I saw your barn. I thought if I could just rest for one night, I would be strong enough to keep going. Where were you planning to go? The mining camps. I heard they need cooks and laundresses, women who can work hard and do not ask questions. I know it is dangerous, but I did not have any other choice. Clayton felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the world that had put her in such a desperate position. A woman like Sarah should have been safe and cared for, not forced to risk her life in the wilderness because society had no place for her. You are not going to the mining camps, he said firmly. You can stay here as long as you need. There is plenty of work on the ranch, and I can pay you a fair wage. You will have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and you will be safe. That is the end of it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was something else there too, a spark of hope that had not been there before. I do not know what to say. Say yes. She nodded, a smile breaking through the tears. Yes, thank you, Clayton. I will work hard, I promise. I will not let you down. I know you will not. Jack cleared his throat from the doorway, and Clayton turned to see the older man grinning. I will get the spare room ready for her, boss. It is not much, but it is warm and clean. Thank you, Jack. As Jack disappeared down the hallway, Clayton turned back to Sarah. You should eat something and then get some rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what kind of work you want to do, but tonight, just focus on taking care of yourself. She nodded and picked up a piece of bread, nibbling at it cautiously as though she was afraid it might disappear. Clayton watched her for a moment, then stood and moved to the stove, pouring himself a cup of coffee. The night stretched out before them, quiet and peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, Clayton felt something stirring in his chest that he had not felt in years. It was not just compassion or duty. It was something deeper, something that made his heart beat a little faster, and his thoughts turned to possibilities he had not dared to consider before. He did not know what the future held for Sarah Calloway, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was going to do everything in his power to make sure she never felt alone or afraid again. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of October day that reminded everyone in Wyoming territory that winter was not far behind. Clayton woke early, as he always did, and went about his usual routine of feeding the cattle and checking the fences. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman sleeping in his spare room, and he found himself hurrying through his chores so he could get back to the house. When he walked into the kitchen, he found Sarah already awake and dressed, her hair pulled back into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. She turned when she heard him enter, and her face lit up with a shy smile. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "I wanted to make myself useful. Mind, I am grateful. I usually just eat whatever Jack throws together, and he is not much of a cook." She laughed, a soft sound that warmed the room, and Clayton felt his heart do a strange little flip. He sat down at the table and watched her work, admiring the efficient way she moved around the kitchen. It was clear she had done this kind of work before, and he found himself wondering what her life had been like in Denver, what she had lost when her father died. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes when two people are at ease with each other. When they finished, Clayton pushed his plate aside and leaned back in his chair. "So, what kind of work are you interested in doing?" he asked. "I have cattle that need tending, horses that need training, and a house that could use a woman's touch. You can do as much or as little as you are comfortable with, and I will pay you a fair wage either way." Sarah folded her hands in her lap, her expression thoughtful. "I am not afraid of hard work. I can cook, clean, and I know a little bit about gardening. If you need help with the house, I can do that, and if there is anything else you need, I am willing to learn." "That sounds perfect. We can start with the house and see how things go. And Sarah, I want you to know that you are not a servant here. You are a guest, and I hope you will come to think of this place as your home." Her eyes glistened with emotion, and she reached across the table to touch his hand. "You are a good man, Clayton Matthews. I do not know what I did to deserve your kindness, but I am grateful beyond words." Clayton felt a jolt of electricity where her fingers touched his skin, and he had to remind himself to breathe. He covered her hand with his own, giving it a gentle squeeze before pulling away. "You do not need to deserve kindness, Sarah. It should be freely given." Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into life on the ranch with a grace that surprised everyone. She transformed the house from a bachelor's quarters into a home, filling it with small touches that made all the difference. Fresh flowers appeared on the table, curtains were mended and cleaned, and the smell of fresh bread became a daily occurrence. She also proved to be an excellent cook, turning simple ingredients into meals that had both Clayton and Jack asking for seconds. But it was not just her domestic skills that impressed Clayton. It was the way she approached everything with quiet determination, never complaining, never asking for more than she needed. She worked alongside him in the garden, planting vegetables for the winter, and she spent hours in the barn, learning to care for the horses. She had a natural way with animals, he noticed, speaking to them in a soft voice that seemed to calm even the most skittish of his mares. As the days turned into weeks, Clayton found himself looking forward to their time together more and more. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie, and talk about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Denver, about her father's shop and the customers who had become like family to her. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to a cholera outbreak when he was 19, and about building this life for himself from nothing. The more he learned about Sarah, the more he admired her. She was strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength, resilient in the face of hardships that would have broken lesser people. And she was kind, always thinking of others before herself, always finding ways to make life a little easier for those around her. It was during one of those evenings on the porch, when the sky was turning the color of embers and the first stars were beginning to appear, that Clayton realized he was falling in love with her. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut, unexpected and undeniable, and he had to grip the arms of his chair to steady himself. Sarah must have noticed something in his expression, because she turned to him with a concerned look. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," he said quickly, though his heart was racing. "Just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "How did you tell a woman that she had become the center of your world in the space of a few weeks? How did you explain that every time you looked at her, you saw not just who she was, but who she could be, who you could be together? About how different things are since you came here," he said finally. "About how much better." She smiled, a slow, warm smile that made his chest ache. "I feel the same way. I never thought I would find a place where I belonged, but this feels like home. You feel like home." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, and Clayton knew he could not let the moment pass without saying what was in his heart. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Sarah, I need you to know something. When I found your letter, I did not come looking for you out of duty or pity. I came because something inside me told me I had to. And now that you are here, now that I have gotten to know you, I realize why. I think I was meant to find you. I think we were meant to find each other." Her breath caught, and her eyes searched his face. "What are you saying, Clayton?" "I am saying that I care about you. More than I have ever cared about anyone. I am saying that I want you to stay, not as a guest or an employee, but as someone who belongs here, with me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, her hand gripping his tightly. "I want that too. I have wanted it for weeks, but I was afraid to hope. I was afraid that if I let myself feel too much, it would all be taken away from me like everything else." "I am not going anywhere," Clayton said fiercely. "And neither are you. We are going to build a life together, Sarah. A real life, full of all the things you have been missing. Love, safety, a future. I promise you that." She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted of salt and hope. Clayton pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and felt the last of the walls around his heart crumble. He had spent so many years alone, convinced that he was destined to live out his days on this ranch with nothing but his cattle and his memories for company. But Sarah had changed everything. She had walked into his life with nothing but a letter and a prayer, and she had given him something he had thought was lost forever. She had given him a reason to believe in love again. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Clayton's life. He and Sarah fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and spending their evenings talking and dreaming about the future. Jack, who had been quietly observing their growing relationship, gave his approval with a knowing grin and a clap on Clayton's back. "About time you found someone, boss," he said one morning as they were fixing a broken section of fence. "You have been alone too long." "I was not looking for anyone," Clayton admitted, "but then she came along and changed everything." "The best things in life are the ones we do not see coming," Jack said sagely. "You hold on to her, you hear me? Women like that do not come around every day. I intend to." But as happy as Clayton was, he knew that there were still obstacles to overcome. Sarah had no family, no ties to anyone or anything, and while that made their relationship simpler in some ways, it also made him worry about her sense of security. He wanted to give her everything, to make sure she never felt like she was dependent on his charity. So one evening, as they sat by the fire in the living room, he brought up the subject that had been on his mind for days. "Sarah, I have been thinking about something, and I want to know how you feel about it." She looked up from the sewing in her lap, her expression curious. "What is it?" "I want to marry you." The words came out more bluntly than he had intended, and he winced, wishing he had planned a more romantic proposal. But Sarah did not seem to mind. Her face broke into a radiant smile, and she set her sewing aside, moving to sit beside him on the couch. "You want to marry me," she repeated, as though she could not quite believe it. "I do. I know we have not known each other for very long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Sarah. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" She threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Clayton held her tight, his heart soaring. He had never imagined that he could feel this way, that another person could make him feel so complete. When she pulled back to look at him, her eyes were shining with joy, and he knew he had made the right decision. "When?" she asked breathlessly. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as possible. We can go into Cheyenne tomorrow and find a preacher. Unless you want something bigger, with more people, she shook her head. I do not need anything big or fancy. I just need you. They went into town the next day, riding together on Thunder with Sarah sitting in front of Clayton, her arms wrapped around his waist. Cheyenne was bustling with activity, the streets crowded with wagons and horses and people going about their business. They found a preacher at the small church on the edge of town, a kindly older man named Reverend Hoskins, who agreed to marry them that very afternoon. Jack served as their witness, standing beside them with a proud grin as they exchanged their vows. Clayton had never been one for fancy words, but when it came time to say his vows, he found that the words came easily, straight from the heart. Sarah, from the moment I read your letter, I knew you were someone special. You have brought light into my life, and I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. I will love you, protect you, and stand by your side no matter what comes our way. You are my partner, my love, and my home. Sarah was crying again, but her voice was steady as she said her own vows. Clayton, you saved me when I had lost all hope. You gave me a home, a purpose, and a love I never thought I would find. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support you, to stand by you, and to love you with all my heart for the rest of my days. You are my safe harbor, my greatest blessing, and the answer to prayers I did not even know I was praying. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of all the love he felt for her, and Sarah kissed him back with a passion that left him breathless. Jack clapped and whooped, and even the Reverend was smiling as he shook their hands and wished them a long and happy life together. They celebrated with a simple dinner at the hotel in town, just the three of them, and then rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. The October air was crisp and cool, but Clayton did not feel the cold. He felt only the warmth of Sarah beside him, the weight of her head resting against his shoulder, and the knowledge that he was the luckiest man in the world. That night, as they lay together in the bed they would now share, Clayton held Sarah close and whispered promises into her hair. He promised to love her always, to give her the family she had lost, to build a future that was bright and full of hope. And Sarah, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest, whispered her own promises in return. Promises of love, loyalty, and a devotion that would never waver. As the months passed, their love only deepened. Winter came to Wyoming territory with a vengeance, blanketing the prairie in snow and sending temperatures plummeting. But inside the ranch house, it was warm and full of life. Sarah filled the rooms with her laughter and her kindness, and Clayton found himself falling more in love with her every single day. They worked together, side by side, tending the cattle and keeping the ranch running through the harsh winter months. Sarah proved to be a quick learner, picking up skills that most women never had the chance to learn. She learned to ride a horse with confidence, to mend fences, and even to help deliver a calf when one of the cows went into labor in the middle of a snowstorm. Clayton watched her with pride and admiration, marveling at her strength and determination. But it was not all work. They made time for each other, for stolen moments of tenderness and joy. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, reading aloud from books they borrowed from the small library in town, or playing cards and laughing at each other's terrible poker faces. On clear nights, they would bundle up in blankets and go outside to stare at the stars, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Sarah said one night, her voice soft and wistful. "I want to fill this house with the sound of little feet and laughter. I want to give them the kind of childhood I had before my father died, full of love and security." Clayton kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "Then that is what we will do, as many children as you want. We will build a family together, Sarah. A family that nothing can tear apart." She turned in his arms to look up at him, her eyes shining with love. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, Clayton. A home, a purpose, a love that makes me feel like I can do anything. I do not know how I got so lucky." "I am the lucky one," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You walked into my life when I had given up on ever finding someone, and you made me believe in miracles again. I love you, Sarah Matthews, more than words can say. I love you too." Spring arrived in a rush of color and warmth, transforming the prairie from a barren white landscape into a sea of wildflowers and green grass. The cattle thrived, the crops they had planted began to sprout, and life on the ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Sarah's belly began to swell with the promise of new life, and Clayton found himself overcome with a sense of awe and responsibility every time he looked at her. They spent hours preparing for the baby, converting one of the spare rooms into a nursery, and filling it with everything they would need. Sarah sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands moving with practiced skill, while Clayton built a cradle from sturdy oak wood, carving little designs into the sides. Jack, who had become something of a grandfather figure to them both, whittled toys and told stories about his own children, who were grown and scattered across the country now. The baby came in late June, on a day when the sun was blazing down and the air was thick with the scent of wildflowers. Clayton had sent Jack into town to fetch the doctor, but the labor progressed so quickly that there was no time. He delivered his son himself, with Sarah gripping his hands and guiding him through the process with a calmness that belied the pain she was in. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Clayton felt tears streaming down his cheeks. He wrapped the tiny boy in a blanket and placed him in Sarah's arms, and the look on her face was something he would never forget. It was pure love, pure joy, a moment of absolute perfection. "He is beautiful," she whispered, her fingers tracing the baby's face. "He looks like you." "He has your eyes," Clayton said, his voice choked with emotion. They named him Thomas after Sarah's father, and he became the center of their world. Clayton had never imagined he could love someone so much, this tiny, helpless creature who depended on them for everything. He would sit for hours just watching Thomas sleep, marveling at the miracle of his existence, and he would thank God every day for bringing Sarah into his life. The years that followed were filled with hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered, and Clayton's reputation as a fair and honest rancher grew. He and Sarah expanded their herd, hired more hands, and built a new barn to accommodate the growth. Sarah continued to be his partner in every sense of the word, managing the household, helping with the cattle, and raising their children. Thomas was joined by a daughter named Emily 2 years later, and then another son named Robert 3 years after that. The house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running through the rooms and toys scattered across the floors. Clayton and Sarah worked hard to give their children the kind of upbringing they had both dreamed of, full of love, security, and opportunities. They taught the children to ride horses, to respect the land, to work hard and be kind to others. They read to them every night, filling their heads with stories of adventure and heroism, and they made sure they knew they were loved beyond measure. Clayton would watch Sarah with the children, seeing the joy in her eyes, and he would think back to that cold October day when he had found her letter and ridden out to find her. It had been the best decision of his life. As the children grew older, Clayton and Sarah made sure to carve out time for themselves, to keep the romance alive that had brought them together in the first place. They would take rides out onto the prairie, just the two of them, and they would talk and laugh and kiss like they were young lovers again. They would dance in the kitchen when the children were asleep, swaying to music only they could hear, and they would fall into bed together exhausted but happy, their bodies and hearts intertwined. One evening when Thomas was 10, Emily was 8, and Robert was 5, Clayton and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had done so many times before. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing across the prairie, and Clayton felt a sense of contentment that was almost overwhelming. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" he asked, taking Sarah's hand. She smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "Of course I do. I was so scared that it was all a dream, that I would wake up and find myself alone again. And now I know it is real. This life, this love, this family, it is everything I ever wanted and more." Clayton lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You gave me everything, Sarah. Before you came into my life, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You changed that. You made me believe in love and family in the future. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am grateful every single day." "You came looking for me," she said simply. "When I was lost and alone, when I had given up hope, you came looking for me. That is the kind of man you are, Clayton Matthews. That is why I love you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear. They sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their children playing, and Clayton thought about all the years that lay ahead of them. There would be challenges, he knew, and hardships. Life on a ranch was never easy, and the world beyond their property was changing in ways they could not always predict. But he also knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. They had built something strong and beautiful together, something that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would carry on the legacy they had started, and their children's children would know the story of how Clayton and Sarah Matthews had found each other against all odds. As the years continued to pass, Clayton and Sarah watched with pride as their children grew into fine young adults. Thomas proved to be a natural rancher, taking on more and more responsibility as he got older, and learning everything Clayton could teach him about running the business. Emily had her mother's kindness and her father's determination, and she dreamed of becoming a teacher so she could help other children learn to read and write. Robert was the adventurous one, always exploring the prairie and bringing home stories of the things he had seen and the places he had discovered. Clayton and Sarah supported each of them in their dreams, knowing that their job as parents was not to hold their children back, but to give them the tools they needed to build their own lives. It was not always easy, especially when Emily announced that she wanted to go to a teaching college in Cheyenne, or when Robert talked about traveling west to see the ocean. But Clayton and Sarah had learned long ago that love meant letting go when it was time, and trusting that the foundation they had built would be strong enough to carry their children through whatever came next. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised Sarah with a trip to Denver, the city where she had lost everything all those years ago. She had been hesitant at first, afraid that returning to the place that held so many painful memories would bring back the sadness and fear she had worked so hard to overcome. But Clayton had insisted, telling her that he wanted to show her that the past no longer had power over her, that she was strong enough to face it and move forward. They took the train to Denver, leaving the children in Jack's capable hands, and spent a week exploring the city together. Sarah showed Clayton the street where her father's shop had been, the house where she had grown up, the church where her father was buried. They stood at his grave together, and Sarah laid flowers on the headstone, her tears falling freely. "I wish you could have met him," she said, her voice breaking. "He would have loved you. He would have been so proud of the life we built together." "I think he knows," Clayton said, putting his arm around her. "I think he is watching over you, and I think he is grateful that you are happy." They spent the rest of the trip making new memories, good memories that would replace the painful ones. They ate at fancy restaurants, went to the theater, and stayed in a beautiful hotel that overlooked the city. On their last night, as they stood on the balcony watching the lights of Denver twinkle in the darkness, Sarah turned to Clayton with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For finding me, for loving me, for giving me a life I never thought I could have. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am so grateful." Clayton cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You do not need to thank me, Sarah. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They kissed then, a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of 20 years of love and devotion, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. They went back inside and made love with a tenderness and intensity that left them both breathless. And as they lay tangled together in the sheets afterward, Clayton thought about how far they had come. 20 years ago, Sarah had been a desperate woman with nowhere to go, and he had been a lonely rancher with no one to share his life with. But they had found each other, and they had built something extraordinary together. A love that had stood the test of time, a family that was strong and united, a life that was full of meaning and purpose. As they grew older, Clayton and Sarah began to think about the legacy they would leave behind. They made sure that the ranch was set up to be passed down to Thomas, with provisions for Emily and Robert to inherit their fair share as well. They created a trust to ensure that the ranch would stay in the family for generations to come, and they worked with lawyers to make sure that everything was in order. But beyond the practical matters, they also focused on passing down the values that had guided their lives. They taught their children and grandchildren about the importance of hard work, honesty, and kindness. They told them the story of how they had met, how Sarah had left a letter in the barn, and how Clayton had ridden out to find her. And they made sure that the younger generations understood the power of love and compassion. "Never forget where you came from," Clayton would tell his grandchildren as they sat on his knee. "Your grandmother and I built this ranch from nothing, with nothing but our love for each other and our determination to create a better life. You have been given a great gift, but it comes with great responsibility. You must take care of this land, take care of each other, and never take what you have for granted." Sarah would add her own wisdom, her voice soft but firm. "And always remember to help those who are less fortunate than you. I was once a woman with nothing, no home, no family, no hope. Your grandfather gave me all of those things, and it changed my life. If you see someone in need, do not turn away. Reach out a hand and help them up. That is what it means to be a good person." The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, absorbing every word, and Clayton and Sarah would share a smile, knowing that the lessons they were teaching would be carried forward long after they were gone. As the years continued to pass, Clayton's body began to slow down. His joints ached in the mornings, his back was not as strong as it used to be, and he found that he could not work as long or as hard as he once had. But his mind was still sharp, and his love for Sarah was as strong as ever. She had aged gracefully, her hair turning silver and lines forming around her eyes, but to Clayton, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. They spent more time together now, less time working and more time simply enjoying each other's company. They would sit on the porch for hours, holding hands and watching the world go by, and they would talk about all the things they had experienced together. The joys and the sorrows, the triumphs and the challenges, the moments that had defined their lives. "You have any regrets?" Sarah asked him one afternoon, her voice thoughtful. Clayton considered the question carefully, his gaze drifting across the prairie that had been his home for so many years. "No," he said finally. "I have lived a good life. I have loved and been loved, I have raised a family, I have built something that will last. What more could a man ask for?" "I feel the same way," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "I was so lost when I came here, so broken, but you put me back together, piece by piece. You gave me a reason to live again, a reason to hope. I will never be able to repay you for that." "You already have," Clayton said, turning to look at her. "You gave me everything I ever wanted. A partner, a family, a love that has filled every day with meaning. I am the one who should be thanking you." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them lost in their own thoughts, and then Sarah leaned her head on Clayton's shoulder. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. Promise me that when the time comes, you will not be sad. We have had a wonderful life together, more than most people ever get. I want you to remember the happy times, not the end." Clayton felt a lump form in his throat, but he nodded. "I promise. But you have to promise me the same thing." "I promise." They stayed like that until the sun set, holding each other close, and Clayton felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that their time together was finite, that one day they would have to say goodbye. But he also knew that the love they had shared would never die. It would live on in their children, in their grandchildren, in the ranch they had built and the stories they had told. It would live on forever. When Clayton was 78 years old, he woke up one morning to find that Sarah had passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was lying beside him, her face serene and beautiful, and for a moment he could not comprehend what had happened. He reached out to touch her cheek, expecting her to open her eyes and smile at him, but she did not move. The grief that followed was like nothing Clayton had ever experienced. It was a physical pain, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had known that this day would come, had prepared himself for it as much as anyone could, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of losing the woman he had loved for more than 50 years. The funeral was held on a warm summer day, with friends and family coming from all over to pay their respects. The church was filled to capacity, and the preacher spoke of Sarah's kindness, her strength, and the legacy she had left behind. Clayton sat in the front pew, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and he listened to the words with a sense of numbness. When it was his turn to speak, he walked to the front of the church and stood before the crowd, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. He looked out at the sea of faces, and then he began to talk. "Sarah was the best person I have ever known," he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "She came into my life when I had given up on ever finding happiness, and she changed everything. She was my partner, my best friend, my greatest love. She taught me what it means to be strong, to be kind, to be selfless. She gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning with a smile on my face." He paused, his voice breaking, and then he continued. "I am not going to stand here and tell you that I am okay with her being gone, because I am not. I miss her more than words can say, and I will miss her every day for the rest of my life. But I am also grateful, so incredibly grateful, for the time we had together. We built a beautiful life, and that life will continue even though she is no longer here. Our children, our grandchildren, the ranch we built together. All of it is a testament to her love, her strength, her spirit." He looked down at the casket, his heart aching. "Sarah, I do not know if you can hear me, but if you can, I want you to know that I love you. I have loved you since the day I found your letter, and I will love you until the day I die. Thank you for everything. Thank you for choosing me, for building a life with me, for making me the happiest man in the world. I will see you again, my love. I promise." He stepped down from the podium and walked to the casket, placing a single red rose on top of it. Then he returned to his seat and the service continued. In the weeks that followed, Clayton struggled to find his footing. The house felt empty without Sarah, and he found himself reaching for her in the middle of the night, only to remember that she was gone. His children tried to comfort him, inviting him to stay with them, but he refused. The ranch was his home, the place where he and Sarah had built their life together, and he could not imagine leaving it. Instead, he threw himself into his memories. He spent hours going through old photographs, reading letters Sarah had written to him over the years, and sitting on the porch where they had shared so many evenings together. He talked to her as though she were still there, telling her about his day, about the children, about the things he wished he could still share with her. And slowly, painfully, he began to heal. The grief never went away, but it became more bearable, a dull ache instead of a sharp pain. He found comfort in the routines they had shared, in the knowledge that she had lived a full and happy life, in the faces of his grandchildren who carried pieces of her in them. One afternoon, about 6 months after Sarah's passing, Clayton was sitting on the porch when Thomas came to visit. His eldest son sat down beside him, and for a moment they just sat in silence, looking out at the prairie. "How are you doing, Dad?" Thomas asked finally. Clayton considered the question. "I am doing okay," he said. "I miss her every day, but I am okay." "She loved you so much," Thomas said. "We all saw it, every day of our lives. The way she looked at you, the way she talked about you, it was like you were the center of her universe." "She was the center of mine," Clayton said quietly. Thomas nodded. "I know. And I just want you to know that we are all so grateful for the example you and Mom set for us. You showed us what real love looks like, what a real partnership looks like. Because of you, we all know what to strive for in our own marriages." Clayton felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them away. "Your mother and I were lucky. We found each other when we both needed someone the most, and we built something beautiful together. I hope all of you find that kind of love in your own lives. We are trying," Thomas said with a smile. "And we have you to thank for showing us the way." They sat together for a while longer, and then Thomas left, promising to visit again soon. Clayton stayed on the porch, watching the sun set, and he felt Sarah's presence all around him. In the wind that rustled through the grass, in the stars that began to appear in the darkening sky, in the warmth that filled his chest when he thought of her. She was gone, but she was not really gone. She lived on in every corner of the ranch, in every memory they had created together, in every life they had touched. And Clayton knew that when his own time came, when he finally closed his eyes for the last time, she would be there waiting for him, her arms open and her smile as radiant as the day he had first ridden out to find her. Clayton lived for another 5 years after Sarah's passing, and in that time he continued to be a pillar of strength for his family. He watched his grandchildren grow up, attended their weddings, and even got to hold his first great-grandchild in his arms. He never remarried, never even considered it, because to him, there was only one Sarah and no one could ever take her place. On a cool autumn morning, when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and hay, Clayton woke up feeling tired in a way he had never felt before. It was not a bad feeling, just a deep, bone-deep weariness that told him his time was near. He got out of bed slowly, dressed in his favorite flannel shirt and jeans, and walked out onto the porch to watch the sunrise one last time. The prairie stretched out before him, bathed in the soft light of dawn, and he thought about all the years he had spent here. All the cattle he had raised, the fences he had mended, the crops he had planted. All the sunrises and sunsets, the storms and clear skies, the hard work and the moments of peace. It had been a good life, a life well lived, and he was ready to let it go. He sat down in his favorite chair, the one he had shared with Sarah so many times, and he closed his eyes. He could feel her presence beside him, as real and solid as if she were actually there, and he reached out to take her hand. "I am coming, Sarah," he whispered. "Wait for me." And then, with a smile on his face and his heart full of love, Clayton Matthews took his last breath. They buried him beside Sarah, in a plot on the ranch that overlooked the prairie they had both loved so much. The whole family came for the funeral, along with friends and neighbors from miles around, and they stood together in the warm autumn sun, saying goodbye to a man who had touched so many lives. Thomas gave the eulogy, his voice strong despite the tears in his eyes. He talked about his father's strength, his kindness, his unwavering love for his family. He talked about the legacy Clayton and Sarah had built together, a legacy that would continue for generations to come. And he talked about the letter that had started it all, the letter that had brought two lost souls together and created something extraordinary. "My father once told me that the best decision he ever made was riding out to find my mother," Thomas said. He said that in that moment he chose love over fear, hope over despair, and it changed his life forever. I think that is a lesson we can all learn from. When we see someone in need, when we have the chance to make a difference, we should not hesitate. We should act with courage and compassion, just like my father did. He paused, looking out at the crowd. "My parents had a love that most people only dream of. They built a life together that was full of joy, purpose, and meaning. And even though they are both gone now, their love lives on in all of us. In the way we treat each other, in the values we hold dear, in the stories we tell our children. They are not really gone as long as we remember them, as long as we live by the example they set." As Thomas stepped away from the podium, the preacher led the crowd in a final prayer, and then the casket was lowered into the ground beside Sarah's. The family stood together, holding each other close, and they watched as the dirt was shoveled over the grave. When it was all over, when the last mourners had left and the sun was beginning to set, Thomas stayed behind. He stood at the edge of the grave, looking down at the two headstones that now marked his parents' final resting place. Clayton Matthews, beloved husband, father, and friend, 1804 to 1887. Sarah Matthews, beloved wife, mother, and inspiration, 1859 to 1882. No, that was not right. Thomas frowned, realizing he had the dates mixed up in his mind. He looked again at the stones, reading the inscriptions carefully. Clayton Matthews, beloved husband, father, and friend, 1804 to 1887. Wait, that did not make sense either. If Clayton had been born in 1804, he would have been 78 when Sarah died in 1932, not 1882. Thomas shook his head, confused, and then realized he was overthinking things. Grief did strange things to the mind. He looked one more time at the graves, and this time the dates were clear. Clayton Matthews, 1846 to 1937. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, and friend. He rode out to find her and found love instead. Sarah Matthews, 1859 to 1932. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and heart of our home. She left a letter and found a home, together forever. Thomas smiled through his tears, knowing that wherever his parents were now, they were together. And that was all that mattered. As the years went by, the ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's care. He passed it down to his own son eventually, and then his son passed it to his children, and the cycle continued. The house was expanded, modernized, but the core of it remained the same. The porch where Clayton and Sarah had sat so many evenings was carefully preserved, and family tradition held that newlyweds would sit there on their first night as husband and wife, looking out at the prairie and thinking about the legacy they were joining. The story of Clayton and Sarah became legend in the family, told and retold at every gathering. Children would sit wide-eyed as their grandparents recounted the tale of the letter in the barn, the desperate woman with nowhere to go, and the cowboy who had dropped everything to find her. It became a symbol of what the family stood for: compassion, courage, and the belief that love could conquer any obstacle. In the town of Cheyenne, the story spread beyond the family as well. The local historical society eventually put up a small plaque near the spot where the old church had stood, the church where Clayton and Sarah had been married. It told the story of their meeting, their love, and the legacy they had built together, and it became a popular spot for couples to visit, especially on anniversaries and special occasions. But more than the physical reminders, it was the spirit of Clayton and Sarah that lived on. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carried with them the values they had instilled, the lessons they had taught. They approached life with the same determination Sarah had shown when she left that letter, the same courage Clayton had demonstrated when he rode out to find her. They built their own lives on the foundation their ancestors had laid, and they made sure that the story of that October day in 1882 was never forgotten. And sometimes, on cool autumn evenings when the wind whispered through the grass and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch. A man and a woman, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love as strong and enduring as the land itself. The ranch stood as a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair. It was a place of hard work and laughter, of family dinners and children playing in the yard, of traditions passed down through generations. It was a place where people came to remember that even in the darkest times, there was always a reason to hope. Because once upon a time, a desperate woman had left a letter in a barn, and a cowboy had ridden out to find her. And in doing so, they had created something that would last forever, a love story for the ages, a legacy that would never die. A reminder that sometimes, the best things in life come when we are brave enough to reach out to someone in need, to offer a hand when someone is falling, to choose compassion over indifference. Clayton and Sarah Matthews had shown the world what true love looked like, and their story would continue to inspire people for generations to come. In the small moments of kindness, in the big gestures of courage, in the everyday choices to love and support one another, their spirit lived on. And somewhere, in a place beyond the reach of time and space, they were together still. Dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear, riding across the prairie with the wind in their hair, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the land they had loved so much. Together forever, just as they had promised, the end of their earthly story, but the beginning of their eternal one. And in the hearts of all who knew them, in the lives they had touched and the legacy they had built, Clayton and Sarah Matthews would live forever. Because true love never dies. It only grows stronger with time,